Any questions?
We saw Lloyd come off the field at the beginning.
Yeah, it's an illness. We listed it, on the injury report. I think he's going to be fine.
Sean, you call plays, and there's plenty of head coaches that are used to calling, offensive plays, and some will do it defensively. But when it's not the plan, and that gets thrust upon a head coach, what kind of challenge can that be?
Meaning when the game changes.
Well, I'm saying when the defensive coordinator is no longer on the staff, and the head coach now gets that re-added to his duties, I guess.
Go ahead and ask that again. Is it a hypothetical? Because I think I don't want to answer a hypothetical.
Well, I guess at least in recent weeks, Matt had to call the defense. So when you're not planning you're not planning on calling the defense or offense.
Well, I would say this. That transition for Matt being the defensive coordinator, the defense he's put in, is I think probably smoother. When we do the week prep, all the cut-ups we look at are, every game last year and then the 3 regular season games this year. And so when you're watching the film, there's Green Bay film. Is it Rodgers or Love? And then you realize last year, the divisional opponents, we're seeing, Green Bay shows up 3 times in that cut-up. But there's a defense we're planning to see. Now, do some tendencies maybe change? I'm sure that naturally happens when there's a different individual calling plays. I always felt as the head coach, it's easier to be more aggressive when you're the play caller. When I was calling plays for Bill, it was like you need to get certain things signed off on, and so I would imagine that same kind of autonomy exists with Matt. He's been a fantastic defensive coach back to Dallas, Indianapolis, and so he's someone that's highly respected in this league. But we're preparing for the defensive structure that we've seen, over those season in 3 games. Go ahead.
I'm just curious, it's a Friday kind of a question, but are you tougher on them this week, maybe?
Yeah, at times. Look, see if this makes sense. And I'm going to go back to Bill, and I don't mean to. The hardest time to work with Bill was when you were 3 or 4 wins in a row. I mean, you couldn't wait for the game. But, you'd have a couple tough losses, and then he'd being a little bit more pick me up. And so I think you got to use your gut relative to what they need. And that began Monday with the team meeting, and then at practice, I felt real good about the energy this week. But I can remember we were 4-1 playing Detroit, and they had kind of had one of those streaks from the year before, and I don't know how many games, but we were a heavy favorite. And he had us all convinced by Friday we were playing the 85 Bears. I mean, you couldn't get to the game fast enough. So I think you trust your instincts relative to your team and where you're at.
John, I think there's been.
I said the other day the value of confrontation.
Well, I don't know that it comes naturally to everyone. I don't know that it didn't for me, but I think with Bill and what I learned was, he grew up in a household where there was confrontation all the time. I mean, and so it became a little bit more learned and comfortable for him. And so if he was bothered by something and he'd create a crisis once in a while, and I learned a lot in that regards. And so sometimes, if things were going well and, we're playing the Colts in that Super Bowl. We just won the NFC Championship game, and the city is celebrating like there's no tomorrow. And the Colts had just won in Miami 4 years earlier. They're at the same hotel, Manning's, same hotel room. And I remember our conversation. He's like, "You got to have a crisis now, but you got to be careful. You're creating one, but it was kind of given to me. Tuesday used to be the media day, and we had 5 players miss buses, 9:30 buses. And so when they got to the locker room, we had a come to Jesus crisis. And then I think that was necessary, in other words, but it was open and honest dialogue. And we're a lot different. And it seemed like here I am referencing him 3 times, but it can be healthy and clear the air in this industry, which sometimes I think is good.
John, there's been a lot more touchbacks league-wide. I think it's almost 80% of kicks compared to about 59% last year. Is there anything you're seeing that could give you?
Well, the rule changed where you can fair catch, look, as soon as those kickoffs were all going back, there's enough teams that said, hey, we feel like we can cover inside the 25, and you started seeing those corner kicks, and now those can be fair caught. So let's just say I'm Coach Harbaugh at Baltimore, and I think I'm good on special teams, and I'm going to defend that high kick into the 5-yard line, and now that doesn't exist because I'm just going to get a fair catch. So I think philosophically there's certain decisions being made, and yet, you have a good returner, and you have one, and you have a guy like Westhoff. I mean, we put our heels 8 yards deep in the end zone with Deontay Hardy and said green light, especially in a game if points are at a premium so I think it's not surprising. I wouldn't have, after 3 weeks, been able to guess that percentage. That'll probably level out a little bit, but I think that element is kind of been taken away.
And the follow was much more pleased does that make you that with fewer chances that you guys have made the most of each of those opportunities essentially?
Yeah, and look, a guy like Mike, who's arguably one of the better special teams coordinators we've seen, is specifically in the return game. I think that was like his 22nd kick return touchdown. I mean, he went 14 years in a row. When he came to us in New Orleans 4 weeks later, Kamara goes 101, and those aren't accidents. So we just assume, you kick off from the 20. But slowly, though, those opportunities, 20 years ago, there were 20 critical special teams plays, and now they're down to maybe 8. You got your punt return, still alive. And so, we value those opportunities.
Sean, going back to creating crisis, is it maybe easier when you're struggling, you're at 0-3, so the crisis is real?
The crisis, well, we don't have to worry about, we're not creating a crisis if it's real, right? We have a crisis. I think it was meant more, that topic, for when things are all going well but again, you trust your instincts with each week in our league, where your team's at and what you think they need. And I don't know that there's a book for that, but experience certainly helps. And, there were 2 different seasons. We started 0-4 in New Orleans, and that's not fun, and got back to 500. But the energy expended to do that takes a toll. And so the key is getting this first win. And look, there's 2 teams playing kind of the same game here, right?
Coach, you've talked about.
What are your thoughts on Jonathan Harris as a guy who's worked his way off the practice squad, worked his way up, and now is a bona fide
Yeah, I think I love what we've done in the last, call it 5 years. There's 2 thoughts. Do you have another league to develop players, or do you give teams more players to develop? And I love that each team has 16 players, and you guys know it. I mean, those players each week, just take a peek, look at the call-ups. And I think COVID kind of brought us there a little bit, and then we weren't as paranoid maybe about stashing players. More players to have on your roster to develop, and those players are playing. And so he's just another example of that. At the beginning of the year, we always put a list of, here are some former practice squad players. And then when you look at the list, you're like, wow, I don't remember him being, and and then here's the list of undrafted free agents. And I like that. And I think universally, I think the teams feel the same way.
Coach, you've talked about it.
What does he get for taking, I know he's part of your plan last week, but taking a full week of reps next to Alex in case he's.
Yeah, I mean, was at the Giants in 2000, and I believe it was Urlacher's first year's rookie season. We played him, I want to say week 2 or week 3 in Soldiers Field, and it was his first start. And he wasn't at Mike then, but you can do a lot, and then there's that time for, hey, let's play. And I'm sure if we went back and looked at that film, it wasn't perfect. He eventually became a Mike, and then eventually became a pain in, everyone's tail. He was a great player. I think that Drew's earned that opportunity, and we saw enough of it in the preseason, and I'm sure he's excited.
Coach, you talked about how you've approached this week. How have the players responded to this week?
Well, I can only go by the practices. I think, man, I thought we had one of our better weeks. I thought the energy was good. Look, you pick yourself up. This is a grit league. There's, the toughness required, and so I thought well.
Mike McGlinchey, obviously the on-field talent, but the off-the-field stuff, the leadership he's been with a program that's kind of turned things around. How much of that was considered when you brought him
Well, it's all is a part of the procurement of our players. Guys that have that. There's a mental element. You want the skill set, and oftentimes we think of it as just for on the field, but every team is going to go through these lows, and those players can handle certain things maybe better than others. And so it wasn't an accident that Ben Powers is here, McGlinchey, every one of these guys, P. Ryan, the draft class, they all have those makeup traits that we're looking for that, it really goes back to Belichick and studying how they valued certain things, and I think we're doing the same thing.
one follow-up there? When Mike or those guys don't panic, do you think the rest of the guys feel that and kind of feed?
Well, that's leadership, and so generally speaking, the more, and it can be fluid. We had great culture for years, and then 14, 15, it got sideways, and then. So it's a little bit like a garden. You got to be tending to it, but it really starts with, bringing in the right guys, and then the really good teams end up leading themselves, and we're in that transition of, finding it. So.
Randy's been healthy, but he hasn't had the production that we saw when he played last year. Is there more there for him?
Well, we're week 3. I don't know that anyone had production last week, and then but it's a fair question, and as an edge player, edge rusher, certainly, I think what's important this week too, relative to who we're playing, is how we rush this quarterback. If you're not careful and there's lanes, 3rd and 8 becomes a first down, 22 yards later, not just 8 yards later. So we got to be on point with his feet and understand, formationally what they're trying to do. You guys remember, I don't know if you recall, they lost a tough game on Thursday night, and then they had an extra weekend, and then they went to New England, and we saw a completely different offense, a lot of quarterback run designs, and they played well and beat the Patriots. So, defensively, we got to prepare for all of that. And, but he's definitely, they were the number 1 rushing team last year in the NFL, and he had a lot to do with that.
Oh, Coach, Lombardi mentioned something yesterday about establishing consistency in the run game, especially later in games. I was wondering, what would it take to establish that consistency later in games?
Well, look, it's a great question. Last week was an anomaly a little bit. The Raider game still, there were so few possessions, but that's going to be our DNA, and hopefully 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks from now, I've answered your question by what you've seen, but I think that's important, and that's how, we saw this offensive line and what we need to do. And look, I think the good teams are able to run the ball well. So clearly this is another week where, different defensive structure and we kind of cover that run list pretty thoroughly. All right. Thank you, guys.